Greetings, welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the annual Uranus Cazimi, which this year occurs on the 17th of May based on universal and at 27 degrees and 17 minutes. A Cazimi is when the other planet is in the heart of the Sun. In terms of the degrees, they're exactly the same. So it's a conjunction, but a conjunction with superpowers, because the Sun provides its thrust, its warmth, its charisma to the other planet in a very positive way. Now, Uranus has a reputation, rightly, of being somewhat disruptive, and it is in its full in Taurus. So it's not been easy ever since it pitched up first for 5 months in mid-May 2018, when it clashed bitterly with Mars. It came back in March 2019, and since then we've seen nothing but disruption. So how can we make this Cazimi work to our advantage? Because there is another factor. The fixed star Algol, which has a mighty but also fearsome reputation, is only 1 degree away from this event. What does that mean? I'm going to unpack all of this for you. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. A very warm welcome. If you're a returning visitor, your views and interactions are truly appreciated. Please help the channel to thrive if you've yet to sub, and do so now, but please also comment and like too. If you're new here, your thoughts are really welcome. This is very much a community. Please share them. If you would like to have a one-to-one with me, please see my testimonials below. I am a consultant astrologer, and it would be a pleasure to assist. Also, you can take advantage of my unique and very special offer. If you order your year 2026 personal forecast now, I'll give you the rest of this year 3, plus you'll get 30% off, but critically also in my special package, your life roadmap report. That will give you searing insights into the patterns that are played out in your life so far, but how to work with them much more intimately. And then the forecast helps you to time your moves as best as possible. Please see below for more. I've also got some members now. If you'd like to become a member on YouTube, I'd be very, very pleased, and thank you so much to those who have decided to support the channel. So this event occurs on the 17th of May in terms of universal at 27 degrees and 17 minutes. So if we think about the part of the sign of Taurus that Uranus is now residing in, the ruler of the sign is Venus. So Venus's characteristics is very much, of course, to do with relating. That's very Libran. But in terms of Taurus, it's about our values. It's about our self-worth. It can be very sensual. It's an earth sign, of course. But Taurus is also fixed, so it likes the degree of continuity, which Uranus has something of an issue with. But that Venusian energy is absolutely delicious. But also we have a sub-ruler for this particular 10 degrees that Uranus is in now, and that sub-ruler is Saturn. Saturn is the traditional ruler of the sign of Aquarius. Uranus is the modern ruler. And that creates a duality. One is much more in touch with continuity, and the other is much more to do with progression. So in a way, we have the potential for a chafing, because Uranus is restless for things to move, and Saturn is reminding Uranus of why we've had things as they are for some time. But in terms of this particular event and Algol, when it applies in the right way to certain planets, can lead to a potential for power. But also there is the potential for sickness. And I think it's important, therefore, to understand through the charts that I'll share with you exactly where those tensions or sickness could show up. So please stay with me for those. However, let's just explore the combination between the Sun and Uranus, because if we go back in the story of Uranus, which takes 84 years to go through its entire cycle, it first moved into Taurus in this particular ingress in May 2018. And when it did, it was for 5 months, it clashed bitterly with Mars. When Mars and Uranus are in conflict, it creates a lot of sudden but aggressive change. And what we've had since then is some very distressing stuff, isn't it, in terms of land, which is very Tauran, but also money, the cost of living, but also resources that we extract from the land, whether it is oil, gas and so forth, whether it's agricultural goods. So we've seen a big pickup in the cost of living, and it's been very unpredictable ever since then. But there are some benefits with Uranus. It's really important to remember those, because Uranus in a way is pushing and provoking us to get in touch with what our higher purpose is, the best of the energy of Aquarius. It's about going beyond the material. It's not clinging on to something because it makes us feel safe if it's starving us of the oxygen of passion. So in a way, if you have gone through any disruption since 2018 initially and 19, however challenging it's been, it's taken you towards a place which is much more in tune with what you really need. Because essentially Uranus is about uniqueness, individuality. It can be an openness to progressiveness, innovation, being fresh, but most of all feeling alive. There's a sense of excitement and electricity when Uranus is in the mix. So we may have experienced during those times some sudden setbacks, changes, disappointments, maybe even some accidents, but also we have had an opportunity to unshackle ourselves and free ourselves from anything which isn't working for us. Now that could be our thinking, if we have self-limiting thinking in terms of our values or what we're attached to. That's stopping us from being a freer spirit, which is essentially what Uranus wants us to be. It's also pushing us on this event to be individualistic. So if there's someone we feel is controlling us a little bit, particularly around money and our choices, we may want to push back and actually do exactly what we want, knowing that they might not like it, because that makes us feel alive, naughty, but also in charge of who we are. So the need with Uranus is very much to be in touch with our uniqueness. And the need of Taurus generally is to be very safety and security orientated, but the energies between them can work in a positive way, but they can also be more challenging if we resist change, and because perhaps we're making our decisions based on purely a financial scenario. So I'm now going to share the 2 event charts with you that give us some deeper insights into what's going on this event. So on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart from a solar perspective with the ascendant nominally on the vernal point, 0 degrees Aries. And there you can see the Sun and Uranus in the 2nd house in the sign of Taurus. Just be conscious of the position of the moon. It is high in the sky, and that's where we can find it a bit more difficult to not demonstrate our emotions. But in the sign of Capricorn, the moon is debilitated. So that's a tender position for the moon, because it can be perhaps a little too materialistic. So if there is a concept or a situation that you're grappling with, and you're trying to stay in touch with your feelings, but also being conditioned by perhaps the need for security, also a big Taurus energy, the moon in a way is urging us not to be too allied to what keeps us safe and be open to what is fresh and different. But essentially the moon and the sun are on very good terms, which is helpful. And I think the moon does take off some of the edge of this particular event. Also, you'll see the North Node is in the sign of Pisces, where it's very emotional. So it's asking us to stay in touch with our senses, particularly our 6th sense, when it comes to any decisions we may decide to make. But do expect some quick moving situations, particularly over the next few days, but it can, as I say, play out over the next year. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart from a Placidus viewpoint based on Greenwich Universal Time. The reason for this is because of the prime meridian, but I feel we can all collectively relate to this chart. So the moon here is in the first house, still in Capricorn, which is where the ascendant is, but you'll see the combination of the Sun and Uranus is in house 4. So the unpredictability could be around emotions, could be around family, could be around our inner world, and particularly if we do feel locked into a situation which is too thwarting for our true spirit, which is what Uranus is asking us to get in touch with. So if you are unhappy with where you're living, you may decide to modify it in some ways. That could be decluttering, it could be moving the furniture around, it could be deciding to move altogether. But generally people are going to want some more space, particularly over this next week or so, but as I say, it can be over the next year too. And that space can, in a way, give us an understanding of who we feel comfortable with in a more intimate sense. Because with Uranus, it asks us or urges us to have a little bit of distance and be more individual where we don't feel so comfortable. So there are the clues in terms of the nativity. Let's go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces and give you a flavour of what each of those holds in store. So Aries, ever since May, the middle of May 2018 through to now, there may have been some changes about how you've gone about earning a living. And if you've decided to put to one side an income stream or an employment situation because it became a little bit too repetitive, it didn't quite give you the excitement and verve that's so important to Aries people, it wouldn't be a complete surprise. Most of us, I feel, are trying to find a balance. You know, we do want to feel that we can pay the bills, but we also want to feel alive and open to different ways of doing things. If you're someone who's very much an innovator and an entrepreneur, you may have had some real buzzy moments in the interval. If you're someone who does prefer a degree of stability in your life, perhaps you have got planets in Taurus as well, this may have been somewhat more challenging, particularly in terms of close relationships, because Uranus is essentially about individuality. The sign of Taurus is about sensuality. So how does that work? You may have had some hot dates and also some very hot connections, but whether they've been long lasting is another matter. And again, it depends exactly where you are in your situation and what you're really wanting. So you could have broken free from something that was too restrictive, but not quite found the sweet spot of what you're looking for. What I can tell you, because this chart or this situation, this basically Uranus return for the next year, can see you having some big connections romantically because of Venus being in your sign, but also the wondrous angle to Mars, your ruler. So if ever there was a time when you can showcase your charisma and magnetism to the max, but at the same time not necessarily sacrifice your individuality for security in the wrong situation, it could keep you available until you do meet the right person. Because with the right person, things like our need for space actually does fade away, because essentially we can share space physically, because emotionally we allow it because we don't feel so challenged. So I would say that there's a lot to go for you over the next year. You've also had, of course, a lot of energy recently in your 12th house. So there may have been quite a few things that have occurred of late which have been somewhat disappointing. And if you are moving on from something, particularly romantically, and you're wanting a fresh start, I think there's lots for you to be excited about. One of the areas that you can enjoy some sizzling encounters will be sharing good food and wine. Taurus, you have so many qualities, but one of your qualities is that maybe you stay with situations a little bit longer than sometimes you should because of that need for continuity, because you're a giver and the stability that it gives you also gives you peace of mind. So therefore Uranus in a way may have been quite challenging if it's been urging you to release certain parts of your life and refresh them with different approaches, when in some ways that's pushed you outside of your comfort zone. But when we get pushed outside of our comfort zone is when we can feel most alive. So I think for some Taurus people, it's been a bit of both. There may be parts of your existence which you have been very comfortable with, but other parts that may be a sense of boredom, and that predictability hasn't actually been something you've enjoyed so much. And Uranus has made you much more aware of it. So if you have found yourself being a bit more daring, doing things a bit more impulsively and off the cuff, good for you. But also if you're still looking for just the right outlet for your individual desires and way to manifest your creativity and talents, don't give up if you aren't quite there yet, because remember, this event gives you a backdrop for the next year. And even though Uranus is moving into your second house on the 7th of July and could bring some sudden financial fortune for 4 months, to be honest, if you're still in the process of really finalizing exactly the direction of travel you want to head, that's fine, because if you look back to the start of this process, I think the experience and knowledge you've gained has been incredibly enriching, and that is going to help you to make the right decision from all the different opportunities that could be showing up at the moment. If you feel that you don't have many opportunities, a sense of frustration and exasperation may be very much to the fore, but try to release that by pushing the pace, forcing the pace. You may actually be inhibiting the natural organic flow of something falling just right for you. So Gemini, since March 2019, I feel there may have been a revelation after revelation. Those revelations may have made you much more conscious of who you can't rely on, but also it could have freed you from old issues that once were quite burdensome. You may have gained a sense of peace, inner peace and tranquility. Your understanding of your deeper motives, but also those of other people, may have absolutely burgeoned. But the opposite can be true in some ways, that because you're so skilled at conversing and pivoting and chatting things through, that mercurial quality that's at the heart of most Gemini people can actually be very deflecting and very avoiding from looking at the shadow side of your nature. And if that is something that you've been doing, the next year with this essentially a solar return for Uranus gives you another window of opportunity to get more comfortable with some parts of your nature that perhaps have made you feel tense, anxious, found it much more difficult to switch off, get to sleep. If you have had adrenal issues over these years, none of it would be a particular surprise. But the more you've embraced things like vulnerability and your deeper motivations, the more at ease you will be with the electric, unsettling energies of Uranus. Because the 12th house in traditional astrology can be about secrets, but it can also be about illness, it can be about withdrawal, it can also be about hidden enemies. So that's why you may have become much more conscious of who is not for you, but equally it's really being for ourselves that's the most important thing. And because Uranus is about authenticity and the 12th house is about our sensitivities, the more in touch you are with that, the more you will have gained. If you've been resisting it, there's still that window of opportunity through to when Uranus moves into your sign full time next April. So do work with this energy as best you can if that is the case. So Cancer, since May 2018 for 5 months and full time since March 2019, you have been able to get in touch with a part of your purpose which has gone beyond the material plane. The 11th house is very idealistic. That may have seen you connecting with some inspirational people, but perhaps also some people who are a little bit more free-spirited, maybe march to the sound of their own drums, a bit more quirky, and some of your older friendships and associations may have not necessarily ended, but may not be quite as actively as at the heart of your situation. But with Saturn, the planet of structure, moving into the most visible part of your chart on the 25th of May, and Jupiter moving into your own sign on the 9th of June, this is going to give you a big existential question to answer. Are you on the right track in terms of your long-term plan, which is Uranus in the 11th house, in terms of being perhaps much freer spirited, perhaps more idealistic in terms of your friendships, or do you want to step back into a bit more of the conventional setting, or do you want to do something that's absolutely on your terms and it's not so much about your connection to others? So those are the questions that are going to be playing out. It will be different for each Cancer person, I feel, but some friendships may have been a little bit, I wouldn't say temperamental, but not necessarily particularly predictable, and in some ways that can be really exciting. But if your life plan has gone through several changes over these intervening years, wouldn't be a surprise. But if you're wanting to move into something that's more settled, stable and enduring, and not be quite so invested in being free-spirited, this is the opportunity you're going to have really quite soon. So Leo, Uranus being in your 10th house, that's right at the top of your chart, may have thrown up some paradoxes for you since March 2019. The 10th house is definitely where we can seek recognition, praise, acknowledgement, raise our profile. You may have done all of those things during that period of time. It could have been through a creative project, a talent, it may have been professionally, but there may have been something a bit different to what you're doing, because Uranus in the 10th house is often an area where people connect to the world in a very original but also talented way. Now, if you are a Leo who likes that recognition and appreciation, but doesn't necessarily like it to be too changeable, you like a degree of continuity, that may have been somewhat challenging. So if there have been some changes in terms of where you work, especially if you work in a corporate environment, that may have actually thrown up some frustrations and disappointments. As this event happens this year, because Venus is in a very freedom-loving part of your chart and Mars is in your sign, I feel you're really perfectly positioned to seize the opportunities in a very powerful way. So if you have thought about leaving full-time employment, working for yourself, doing something that does raise your profile, but it is something that's fresh, different and novel, well, go for it, and go for it big time, because it could give you a reward. In fact, once Uranus moves into the sign of Gemini on the 7th of July for 4 months, you might start connecting to people that in the past you may have thought were never your cup of tea, which just shows with Uranus that it's always opening our eyes to looking at life and ourselves in a fresh, more authentic way. Virgo, you have an exquisite appreciation of routines, but what this event is urging you to do is to break your routines and to break them in as sudden a way as possible. Because if you decide to choose a different holiday destination, or you break free of a relationship which has really lost all of its sparkle, but you've just been in it for a long time, or there's a job you've had that has been a big part of your situation, the 9th house energy of the Sun and Uranus is asking you to be particularly daring as far as your more independent nature is concerned. And that's not necessarily easy for Virgos, because there's a part of you that likes to be very supportive to others, and Pluto's asking you to look at some of those obligations and routines and structures, especially if they have become a little stale. Also, Mars is stirring up a lot of deep emotional stuff at the moment. So if you're in a situation where you feel trapped, this event and the energy that it provides for the next year is asking you to take one big step away from what is really holding you back. But I appreciate that's not necessarily easy. If your situation is generally working better, it may be that you're going to make a big decision over a course of education, a holiday destination, or even a mode of transport. Libra, the 8th house, where the Sun and Uranus meet, is very much about where we're most invested, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, even intimately. Now, if something is working really well, the more open-minded you can be to those areas, and the more you can bring fresh approaches in, the more they can thrive, because the 8th house is about transformation. But if you are in a relationship where you've done your absolute level best to try to make it prosper, the fact that Venus, your ruler, is linking so brilliantly to Mars in your sector of freedom on this event tells me if you feel that that giving, investing is never going to be reciprocated, not necessarily in a quid pro quo basis, but just that the other person will never really show the same commitment as you, whether it's a business partner, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friendship or romantically, you could have quite a compelling and impulsive need to break free, which could surprise even you. It may not be that you're quite at the peak of the situation to make a final binding decision, but it wouldn't be a surprise for some. Scorpio, the interesting thing about Uranus is that he is exalted in your sign and in his fall in your opposite sign. And your opposite sign essentially is about relationships. Relationships rely on people giving and taking, but Uranus in a way wants to only connect with people where it's absolutely authentic. So you could connect to someone at this time in a very, very exciting manner, but not necessarily a particularly lasting way, because it could be an exciting connection, but it is essentially a fling. But you could also decide in an ongoing relationship that you can take that next step forwards because it does feel comfortable enough to sacrifice your freedom because it feels real and authentic. The converse can be true, of course. You know, you may want to have some space. Even if that space is just temporary, it would be good for you. But I feel if you look back to March 2019, the chances are that things have been pretty changeable around relationships. If you're someone who's fine with that, that's all good and dandy. If you're someone who's craving much more stability, now your modern ruler Pluto is in your 4th house, that could be part of your calculus. What you won't want to compromise on is that the other person is utterly and completely truthfully honest with you, and you're absolutely right. Sagittarius, you have an innate appreciation of the big picture, adventure, independence, and sometimes the everyday routines of life can seem as dull as the proverbial ditch water to you. But since Uranus has been in your 6th house, which controls those areas, 4 times since March 2019, getting some kind of rhythm into your life may have proved somewhat elusive. But what Uranus perhaps has done is given you some fresh approaches to those areas, and your ability to be very open to those kind of ideas could have seen you work that terrifically well. But there may have been other times when you have felt somewhat exasperated. For example, if you are working in a job that's very limiting, very workaday, it is not particularly stimulating. I think this combination is really asking you to push and try and make a change. Try and find something that does bring that sense of excitement and drama, which is very important to you. I think Saturn moving into your 5th house on the 25th of May is really going to be helpful. Uranus into your sector of relating on the 7th of July, another exciting event for you. Jupiter into the 8th on the 9th of June, that's an interesting one because that's going to be clashing with Saturn. What I would say is that maybe all that you've learned with Uranus in the 6th house needs to just find the right application, and if you haven't quite found it, I believe you're going to find it relatively soon. Capricorn, in April 2026, Uranus will wave goodbye and it won't come back round to this exact position for another 84 years. So between then, of course, Uranus is going to move into a practical area from the 7th of July through to the middle of October. But for you, the 5th house, where he's been, has given you a chance to surprise people at times with your passion, your flair, your spontaneity. Because if we think about the archetype of your sign, it is a little bit resistant to risk. And Uranus in some ways wants us, particularly in the 5th house, to be much more flamboyant. Chances are, I think, you have been flamboyant. If you haven't quite had the romantic connection you would like, you have got Jupiter moving into your sector of relating to look forwards to from the 9th of June, so that's good. But because it will be squaring up with your ruler, even though those connections have to be mindful of your need for a degree of stability, because that's where Saturn, your ruler, is moving into. So whatever talents you've got, even if you haven't seen some tangible results, which can be important to you, keep demonstrating just how brilliant and dazzling that you can be, because that in itself is a wonderful thing. If in the past you may have been a little too shy or a little too resistant to having the confidence to push yourself forwards in some kind of brilliant and very positive, but in some ways surprising manner. Aquarius, I think it was Nelson Mandela who said that the hardest thing for us all is to be true to ourselves. Aquarius people have a duality, as I've mentioned before. So the Saturn side is very much an appreciation of the past, particularly around friendships, loyalty and heritage. But that Uranian side is much more about challenging the status quo, being more provocative. So Uranus being in the 4th house has likely meant that there's been some frank and sometimes difficult conversations with people that you've been close to since he arrived for the first time in May 2018. In fact, that first 5 months may have been quite traumatic because of the clash with Mars, which began just on the anaretic degree of Capricorn, but then made its way into Aquarius, but then went into a retrograde. So that chafing and frustration that Mars not being heard, recognised or seen, because Uranus is about authenticity. So if you've had people from your past around you that don't hear you for who you really feel you are, that has probably created some friction or disappointments, and perhaps a need to actually leave those situations and get in touch with your unique autonomy. And quite understandably, if however the change for you with Uranus in the 4th house has more been physical, where you actually live, who you live with, the community that you connect to, that is also an area that may have played out. You may have started to work from home, particularly if you're linked up technologically wise with Uranus in the 4th house. Pretty standard, I'd say. So what can we expect over the next year? Well, if you think that Saturn is just about to move into the 3rd house, which has that more Gemini quick moving energy, even if Saturn can be a bit stodgy, and Uranus itself is about to move into your 5th, they're both linking back to Pluto in your sign. I feel that some of the unsettled conditions around where you live and how you live there are making way for a much more exciting vista that's coming, particularly if Uranus has really encouraged you and you've found your voice to say who you are, even if it has separated you from situations which no longer serve your greater good. Pisces, when Uranus first arrived in your 3rd house in the middle of May 2018, you may have seen or experienced a number of difficult revelations over that first 4 or 5 months, some quite wounding revelations. You may have realised that some people weren't as invested in you as much as you would like. However, over time, what Uranus has done has given you a fantastic opportunity to express and connect to others in a very impactful way. It's just over the last couple of years, Saturn has been asking you to hunker down, focus on your inner, the inner part of your world, not be so outgoing. But I feel that with Jupiter about your traditional ruler, about to go into your 5th house from the 9th of June, yes, it is still going to be challenged by Saturn, which hasn't been a helpful influence over the last year. Just having Jupiter as it is, it absolutely sparkles in the sign of Cancer. And I think you're going to surprise yourself, but from the middle of October through to the end of April next year, you really will find your voice. And I think you're going to find some connections that are going to prove very, very exciting and could also be ultimately in the longer term very profitable too. Thank you so much for joining me for this Uranus Cazimi special. Wishing you all the best on the exact event, but also over the next year. Please do visit my new website at patrickarundell.com. There's loads of goodies, including daily, weekly, monthly and yearly general, love and Vedic horoscopes.